The Tin Woodman of Oz by l.frank Baum. Chapter 20. Overnight. The land of the Munchkins is full of surprises, as our travelers had already learned, and although Mount Munch was constantly growing larger as they advanced toward it, they knew it was still a long way off, and were not certain by any means that they had escaped all danger or encountered their last adventure. The plain was broad, and as far as the eye could see there seemed to be a level stretch of country between them and the mountain. But toward evening they came upon a hollow in which stood a tiny blue Munchkin dwelling with a garden around it, and fields of grain filling in all the rest of the hollow. They did not discover this place until they came close to the edge of it, and they were astonished at the sight that greeted them, because they had imagined that this part of the plain had no inhabitants. "It's a very small house," Woot declared. "I wonder who lives there." "The way to find out is to knock on the door and ask," replied the Tin Woodman. "Perhaps it is the home of Nimmy Ammy." "Is she a dwarf?" asked the boy. "No, indeed. Nimmy Ammy is a full-sized woman." "Then I'm sure she couldn't live in that little house," said Woot. "Let's go down," suggested the Scarecrow. "I'm almost sure I can see a straw stack in the backyard." They descended the hollow, which was rather steep at the sides, and soon came to the house, which was indeed rather small. Woot knocked upon a door that was not much higher than his waist, but got no reply. He knocked again, but not a sound was heard. "Smoke is coming out of the chimney," announced Polychrome, who was dancing lightly through the garden, where cabbages and beets and turnips and the like were growing finely. "Then someone surely lives here," said Woot, and knocked again. Now a window at the side of the house opened, and a queer head appeared. It was white and hairy, and had a long snout and little round eyes. The ears were hidden by a blue sunbonnet tied under the chin. "Oh, it's a pig!" exclaimed Woot. "Pardon me, I am Mrs. Squealina Swine, wife of Professor Grunter Swine, and this is our home," said the one in the window. "What do you want?" "What sort of a professor is your husband?" inquired the Tin Woodman curiously. "He is professor of cabbage culture and corn perfection. He is very famous in his own family, and would be the wonder of the world if he went abroad," said Mrs. Swine in a voice that was half proud and half irritable. "I must also inform you intruders that the professor is a dangerous individual, for he files his teeth every morning until they are sharp as needles. If you are butchers, you'd better run away and avoid trouble." "We are not butchers," the Tin Woodman assured her. "Then what are you doing with that axe? And why has the other tin man a sword?" "They are the only weapons we have to defend our friends from their enemies," explained the Emperor of the Winkies, and Woot added, "Do not be afraid of us, Mrs. Swine, for we are harmless travelers. The Tin Men and the Scarecrow never eat anything, and Polychrome feasts only on dewdrops. As for me, I'm rather hungry, but there is plenty of food in your garden to satisfy me." Professor Swine now joined his wife at the window, looking rather scared in spite of the boy's assuring speech. He wore a blue Munchkin hat with pointed crown and broad brim, and big spectacles covered his eyes. He peeked around from behind his wife, and after looking hard at the strangers, he said, "My wisdom assures me that you are merely travelers, as you say, and not butchers. Butchers have reason to be afraid of me, but you are safe. We cannot invite you in, for you are too big for our house, but the boy who eats is welcome to all the carrots and turnips he wants. Make yourselves at home in the garden, and stay all night if you like, but in the morning you must go away, for we are quiet people and do not care for company." "May I have some of your straw?" asked the Scarecrow. "Help yourself," replied Professor Swine. "For pigs, they're quite respectable," remarked Woot, as they all went toward the straw stack. "I'm glad they didn't invite us in," said Captain Fighter. "I hope I'm not too particular about my associates, but I draw the line at pigs." The Scarecrow was glad to be rid of his hay, for during the long walk it had sagged it down and made him fat and squatty and more bumpy than at first. "I'm not specially proud," he said, "but I love a manly figure such as only straw stuffing can create. I've not felt like myself since that hungry hippo ate my last straw." Polychrome and Woot set to work removing the hay, and then they selected the finest straw, crisp and golden, and with it stuffed the Scarecrow anew. He certainly looked better after the operation, and he was so pleased at being reformed that he tried to dance a little jig, and almost succeeded. "I shall sleep under the straw stack tonight," Woot decided, after he had eaten some of the vegetables from the garden, and in fact he slept very well with the 2 tin men and the Scarecrow sitting silently beside him, and Polychrome away somewhere in the moonlight dancing her fairy dances. At daybreak the Tin Woodman and the Tin Soldier took occasion to polish their bodies and oil their joints, for both were exceedingly careful of their personal appearance. They had forgotten the quarrel due to their accidental bumping of one another in the invisible country, and being now good friends, the Tin Woodman polished the Tin Soldier's back for him, and then the Tin Soldier polished the Tin Woodman's back. For breakfast, the Wanderer ate crisp lettuce and radishes, and the Rainbow's daughter, who had now returned to her friends, sipped the dewdrops that had formed on the petals of the wildflowers. As they passed the little house to renew their journey, Woot called out, "Goodbye, Mr. and Mrs. Swine." The window opened, and the 2 pigs looked out. "A pleasant journey," said the professor. "Have you any children?" asked the Scarecrow, who was a great friend of children. "We have 9," answered the professor, "but they do not live with us, for when they were tiny piglets, the Wizard of Oz came here and offered to care for them and to educate them. So we let him have our 9 tiny piglets, for he's a good wizard and can be relied upon to keep his promises." "I know the 9 tiny piglets," said the Tin Woodman. "So do I," said the Scarecrow. "They still live in the Emerald City, and the wizard takes good care of them and teaches them to do all sorts of tricks." "Did they ever grow up?" inquired Mrs. Squealina Swine in an anxious voice. "No," answered the Scarecrow. "Like all other children in the land of Oz, they will always remain children, and in the case of the tiny piglets that is a good thing, because they would not be nearly so cute and cunning if they were bigger." "But are they happy?" asked Mrs. Swine. "Everyone in the Emerald City is happy," said the Tin Woodman. "They can't help it." Then the travelers said goodbye and climbed the side of the basin that was towards Mount Munch. The end of Chapter 20.
The Tin Woodman of Oz by l.frank Baum. Chapter 21. Polychrome's Magic. On this morning, which ought to be the last of this important journey, our friends started away as bright and cheery as could be, and Woot whistled a merry tune so that Polychrome could dance to the music. On reaching the top of the hill, the plain spread out before them in all its beauty of blue grasses and wildflowers, and Mount Munch seemed much nearer than it had the previous evening. They trudged on at a brisk pace, and by noon the mountain was so close that they could admire its appearances. Its slopes were partly clothed with pretty evergreens, and its foothills were tufted with a slender, waving bluegrass that had a tassel on the end of every blade. And for the first time they perceived, near the foot of the mountain, a charming house, not of great size, but neatly painted, and with many flowers surrounding it, and vines climbing all over the doors and windows. It was towards this solitary house that our travelers now directed their steps, thinking to inquire of the people who lived there where Nimmy-Ammy might be found. There were no paths, but the way was quite open and clear, and they were drawing near to the dwelling when Woot the Wanderer, who was then in the lead of the little party, halted with such an abrupt jerk that he stumbled over backward and lay flat on his back in the meadow. The Scarecrow stopped to look at the boy. "Why did you do that?" he asked in surprise. Woot sat up and gazed around him in amazement. I don't know," he replied. The 2 tin men, arm in arm, started to pass them when both halted and tumbled with a great clatter into a heap beside Woot. Polychrome, laughing at the absurd sight, came dancing up, and she also came to a sudden stop, but managed to save herself from falling. Every one of them was much astonished, and the Scarecrow said with a puzzled look, "I don't see anything." "Nor I," said Woot, "but something hit me just the same." "Some invisible person struck me a heavy blow," declared the Tin Woodman, struggling to separate himself from the Tin Soldier, whose legs and arms were mixed with his own. "I'm not sure it was a person," said Polychrome, looking more grave than usual. "It seems to me that I merely ran into some hard substance which barred my way." In order to make sure of this, let me try another place." She ran back a way, and then, with much caution, advanced in a different place. But when she reached a position on a line with the others, she halted, her arms outstretched before her. "I can feel something hard, something smooth as glass," she said, "but I'm sure it is not glass." "Let me try," suggested Woot, getting up. But when he tried to go forward, he discovered the same barrier that Polychrome had encountered. "No," he said, "it isn't glass. But what is it?" "Air," replied a small voice beside him. "Solid air, that's all." They all looked downward and found a sky-blue rabbit had stuck his head out of a burrow in the ground. The rabbit's eyes were a deeper blue than his fur, and the pretty creature seemed friendly and unafraid. "Air?" exclaimed Woot, staring in astonishment into the rabbit's blue eyes. "Who ever heard of air so solid that one cannot push it aside?" "You can't push this air aside," declared the rabbit, "for it was made hard by powerful sorcery, and it forms a wall that is intended to keep people from getting to that house yonder." "Oh, it's a wall, is it?" said the Tin Woodman. "Yes, it really is a wall," answered the rabbit, "and it is fully 6 feet thick." "How high is it?" inquired Captain Fighter, the tin soldier. "Oh, ever so high, perhaps a mile," said the rabbit. "Couldn't we go around it?" asked Woot. "Of course, for the wall is a circle," explained the rabbit. "In the center of the circle stands the house, so you may walk around the wall of solid air, but you can't get to the house." "Who put the air wall around the house?" was the Scarecrow's question. "Nimmy-Ammy did that." "Nimmy-Ammy!" they all exclaimed in surprise. "Yes," answered the rabbit. "She used to live with an old witch who was suddenly destroyed, and when Nimmy-Ammy ran away from the witch's house, she took with her just one magic formula. Pure sorcery it was, which enabled her to build this air wall around her house, the house yonder. It was quite a clever idea, I think, for it doesn't mar the beauty of the landscape, solid air being invisible, and yet it keeps all strangers away from the house." "Does Nimmy-Ammy live there now?" asked the Tin Woodman anxiously. "Yes, indeed," said the rabbit. "And does she weep and wail from morning till night?" continued the Emperor. "No, she seems quite happy," asserted the rabbit. The Tin Woodman seemed quite disappointed to hear this report of his old sweetheart, but the Scarecrow reassured his friend, saying, "Never mind, Your Majesty. However happy Nimmy-Ammy is now, I'm sure she will be much happier as Empress of the Winkies." "Perhaps," said Captain Fighter somewhat stiffly, "she will be still more happy to become the bride of a tin soldier." "She shall choose between us as we have agreed," the Tin Woodman promised. "But how shall we get to the poor girl?" Polychrome, although dancing lightly back and forth, had listened to every word of the conversation. Now she came forward and sat herself down just in front of the blue rabbit, her many-hued draperies giving her the appearance of some beautiful flower. The rabbit didn't back away an inch. Instead, he gazed at the rainbow's daughter admiringly. "Does your burrow go underneath this wall of air?" asked Polychrome. "To be sure," answered the blue rabbit. "I dug it that way so I could roam in these broad fields by going out one way, or eat the cabbages in Nimmy-Ammy's garden by leaving my burrow at the other end. I don't think Nimmy-Ammy ought to mind the little I take from her garden or the hole I've made under her magic wall. A rabbit may come and go as he pleases, but no one who is bigger than I could get through my burrow." "Will you allow us to pass through it if we are able to?" inquired Polychrome. "Yes, indeed," answered the blue rabbit. "I'm no especial friend of Nimmy-Ammy, for once she threw stones at me just because I was nibbling some lettuce, and only yesterday she yelled 'Shoo!' at me, which made me nervous. You're welcome to use my burrow in any way you choose." "But this is all nonsense," declared Woot the Wanderer. "We are every one too big to crawl through a rabbit's burrow." "We are too big now," agreed the Scarecrow, "but you must remember that Polychrome is a fairy, and fairies have many magic powers." Woot's face brightened as he turned to the lovely daughter of the rainbow. "Could you make us all as small as that rabbit?" he asked eagerly. "I can try," answered Polychrome with a smile. And presently she did it, so easily that Woot was not the only one astonished. As the now tiny people grouped themselves before the rabbit's burrow, the hole appeared to them like the entrance to a tunnel, which indeed it was. "I'll go first," said wee Polychrome, who had made herself grow as small as the others, and into the tunnel she danced without hesitation. A tiny Scarecrow went next, and then the two funny little tin men. "Walk in, it's your turn," said the Blue Rabbit to Woot the Wanderer. "I'm coming after to see how you get along. This will be a regular surprise party to Nimmy Ammy." So Woot entered the hole and felt his way along its smooth sides in the dark until he finally saw the glimmer of daylight ahead and knew the journey was almost over. Had he remained his natural size, the distance could have been covered in a few steps, but to a thumb-high Woot it was quite the promenade. When he emerged from the burrow, he found himself but a short distance from the house in the center of the vegetable garden, where the leaves of rhubarb waving above his head seemed like trees. Outside the hole, and waiting for him, he found all his friends. "So far, so good," remarked the Scarecrow cheerfully. "Yes, so far, but no farther," returned the Tin Woodman in a plaintive and disturbed tone of voice. "I am now close to Nimmy Ammy, whom I have come ever so far to seek. But I cannot ask the girl to marry such a little man as I am now." "I'm no bigger than a toy soldier," said Captain Fighter, sorrowfully. "Unless Polychrome can make us big again, there is little use in our visiting Nimmy Ammy at all, for I'm sure she wouldn't care for a husband she might carelessly step on and ruin." Polychrome laughed merrily. "If I make you big, you can't get out of here again," said she, "and if you remain little, Nimmy Ammy will laugh at you. So make your choice." "I think we'd better go back," said Woot seriously. "No," said the Tin Woodman stoutly. "I have decided that it's my duty to make Nimmy Ammy happy in case she wishes to marry me." "So have I," announced Captain Fighter. "A good soldier never shrinks from doing his duty." "As for that," said the Scarecrow, "Tin doesn't shrink any to speak of under any circumstances. But Woot and I intend to stick to our comrades whatever they decide to do, so we will ask Polychrome to make us as big as we were before." Polychrome agreed to this request, and in half a minute all of them, including herself, had been enlarged again to their natural sizes. They then thanked the Blue Rabbit for his kind assistance, and at once approached the house of Nimmy Ammy. The end of Chapter 21. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L.Frank Baum. Chapter 22. Nimmy Ammy. We may be sure that at this moment our friends were all anxious to see the end of the adventure that had caused them so many trials and troubles. Perhaps the Tin Woodman's heart did not beat any faster because it was made of red velvet and stuffed with sawdust, and the Tin Soldier's heart was made of tin and reposed in his tin bosom without a hint of emotion. However, there is little doubt that they both knew that a critical moment in their lives had arrived, and that Nimmy Ammy's decision was destined to influence the future of one or the other. As they assumed their natural sizes, and the rhubarb leaves that had before towered above their heads now barely covered their feet, they looked around the garden and found that no person was visible save themselves. No sound of activity came from the house either, but they walked to the front door, which had a little porch built before it, and there the two tin men stood side by side, while both knocked upon the door with their tin knuckles. As no one seemed to answer the summons, they knocked again, and then again. Finally, they heard a stir from within, and someone coughed. "Who's there?" called a girl's voice. "It's I," cried the Tin Twins together. "How did you get there?" asked the voice. They hesitated on how to reply, so Woot answered for them. "By means of magic." "Oh," said the unseen girl. "Are you friends or foes?" "Friends!" they all exclaimed. Then they heard footsteps approach the door, which slowly opened and revealed a very pretty Munchkin girl standing in the doorway. "Nimmy Ammy!" cried the Tin Twins. "That's my name," replied the girl, looking at them in cold surprise. "But who can you be?" "Don't you know me, Nimmy?" said the Tin Woodman. "I'm your old sweetheart, Nick Chopper." "Don't you know me, my dear?" said the Tin Soldier. "I'm your old sweetheart, Captain Fighter." Nimmy Ammy smiled at them both. Then she looked beyond them at the rest of the party and smiled again. However, she seemed more amused than pleased.
"Come in," she said, leading the way inside. "Even sweethearts are forgotten after a time, but you and your friends are welcome." The room they now entered was cozy and comfortable, being neatly furnished and well swept and dusted. But they found someone there besides Nimmy Ammy. A man dressed in the attractive Munchkin costume was lazily reclining in an easy-chair, and he sat up and turned his eyes on the visitors with a cold and indifferent stare that was almost insolent. He did not even rise from his seat to greet the strangers, but after glaring at them, he looked away with a scowl, as if they were of too little importance to interest him. The Tin Men returned this man's stare with interest, but they did not look away from him because neither of them seemed able to take his eyes off this Munchkin, who was remarkable in having one tin arm quite like their own tin arms. "Seems to me," said Captain Fighter in a voice that sounded harsh and indignant, "that you, sir, are a vile impostor." "Gently, gently," cautioned the Scarecrow. "Don't be rude to strangers, Captain." "Rude!" shouted the tin soldier, now very much provoked. "Why, he's a scoundrel! A thief! The villain is wearing my own head." "Yes," added the Tin Woodman, "and he's wearing my right arm. I can recognize it by the 2 warts on the little finger." "Good gracious!" exclaimed Woot. "Then this must be the man whom old Kuklip patched together and named Chopfight." The man now turned toward them, still scowling. "Yes, that is my name," he said in a voice like a growl, "and it is absurd for you tin creatures, or for anyone else, to claim my head, my arm, or any part of me, for they are my personal property." "You're a nobody," shouted Captain Fighter. "You're just a mix-up," declared the Emperor. Now, gentlemen," interrupted Nimmy Ammy, "I must ask you to be more respectful to poor Chopfight, for, being my guests, it is not polite for you to insult my husband." "Your husband!" the Tin Twins exclaimed in dismay. "Yes," said she, "I married Chopfight a long time ago because my other 2 sweethearts had deserted me." This reproof embarrassed both Nick Chopper and Captain Fighter. They looked down, shamefaced, for a moment, and then the Tin Woodman explained in an earnest voice. "I rusted." "So did I," said the Tin Soldier. "I could not know that, of course," asserted Nimmy Ammy. "All I knew was that neither of you came to marry me as you had promised to do. But men are not scarce in the land of Oz. After I came here to live, I met Mr. Chopfight, and he was the more interesting because he reminded me strongly of both of you, as you were before you became tin. He even had a tin arm, and that reminded me of you the more." "No wonder," remarked the Scarecrow. "But listen, Nimmy Ammy," said the astonished Woot. "He really is both of them, for he is made of their cast-off parts." "Oh, you're quite wrong," declared Polychrome, laughing, for she was greatly enjoying the confusion of the others. "The Tin Men are still themselves, as they will tell you, and so Chopfight must be someone else." They looked at her bewildered, for the facts in the case were too puzzling to be grasped at once. "It is all the fault of old Kuklip," muttered the Tin Woodman. "He had no right to use our cast-off parts to make another man with." "It seems he did it, however," said Nimmy Ammy calmly, "and I married him because he resembled you both. I won't say he is a husband to be proud of, because he has a mixed nature and isn't always an agreeable companion. There are times when I have to chide him gently, both with my tongue and with my broomstick, but he is my husband, and I must make the best of him." "If you don't like him," suggested the Tin Woodman, "Captain Fighter and I can chop him up with our axe and sword, and each take such parts of the fellow as belong to him. Then we are willing for you to select one of us as your husband." "That is a good idea," approved Captain Fighter, drawing his sword. "No," said Nimmy Ammy. "I think I'll keep the husband I now have. He is now trained to draw the water, and carry in the wood, and hoe the cabbages, and weed the flower beds, and dust the furniture, and perform many tasks of a like character. A new husband would have to be scolded and gently chided until he learns my ways. So I think it will be better to keep my Chopfight, and I see no reason why you should object to him. You two gentlemen threw him away when you became tin because you had no further use for him, so you cannot justly claim him now. I advise you to go back to your own homes and forget me as I have forgotten you." "Good advice," laughed Polychrome, dancing. "Are you happy?" asked the tin soldier. "Of course I am," said Nimi-Ammi. "I'm the mistress of all I survey, the queen of my little domain." "Wouldn't you like to be the Empress of the Winkies?" asked the Tin Woodman. "Mercy, no," she answered. "That would be a lot of bother. I don't care for society or pomp or posing. All I ask is to be left alone and not to be annoyed by visitors." The Scarecrow nudged Woot the Wanderer. "That sounds to me like a hint," he said. "Looks as if we'd had our journey for nothing," remarked Woot, who was a little ashamed and disappointed because he had proposed the journey. "I am glad, however," said the Tin Woodman, "that I have found Nimi-Ammi and discovered that she is already married and happy. It will relieve me of any further anxiety concerning her." "For my part," said the Tin Soldier, "I am not sorry to be free. The only thing that really annoys me is finding my head upon Chopfight's body. As for that, I'm pretty sure it is my body, or a part of it, anyway," remarked the Emperor of the Winkies. "But never mind, friend soldier. Let us be willing to donate our cast-off members to ensure the happiness of Nimi-Ammi, and be thankful it is not our fate to hoe cabbages and draw water, and be chided in the place of this creature, Chopfight." "Yes," agreed the soldier, "we have much to be thankful for." Polychrome, who had wandered outside, now poked her pretty head through an open window and exclaimed in a pleased voice, "It's getting cloudy. Perhaps it is going to rain." The end of Chapter 22. The Tin Woodman of Oz by L.Frank Baum. Chapter 23. Through the Tunnel. It didn't rain just then, although the clouds in the sky grew thicker and more threatening. Polychrome hoped for a thunderstorm followed by her rainbow, but the two tin men did not relish the idea of getting wet. They even preferred to remain in Nimi-Ammi's house, although they felt that they were not welcome there, rather than go out and face the coming storm. But the Scarecrow, who was a very thoughtful person, said to his friends, "If we remain here until after the storm, and Polychrome goes away on her rainbow, then we will be prisoners inside the wall of solid air. So it seems best to start upon our return journey at once. If I get wet, my straw stuffing will be ruined, and if you two tin gentlemen get wet, you may perhaps rust again and become useless. But even that is better than to stay here. Once we are free of the barrier, we have Woot the Wanderer to help us, and he can oil your joints and restuff my body if it becomes necessary, for the boy is made of meat, which neither rusts nor gets soggy or moldy." "Come along, then," cried Polychrome from the window, and the others, realizing the wisdom of the Scarecrow's speech, took leave of Nimi-Ammi, who was glad to be rid of them, and said good-bye to her husband, who merely scowled and made no answer, and then they hurried from the house. "Your old parts are not very polite, I must say," remarked the Scarecrow when they were in the garden. "No," said Woot. "Chopfight is a regular grouch. He might have wished us a pleasant journey at the very least." "I beg you not to hold us responsible for that creature's actions," pleaded the Tin Woodman. "We are through with Chopfight and shall have nothing further to do with him." Polychrome danced ahead of the party and led them straight to the burrow of the Blue Rabbit, which they might have had some difficulty in finding without her. There she lost no time in making them all small again. The Blue Rabbit was busy nibbling cabbage leaves in Nimi's garden, so they did not ask his permission, but at once entered the burrow. Even now the raindrops were beginning to fall, but it was quite dry inside the tunnel, and by the time they had reached the other end outside the circular wall of solid air, the storm was at its height, and the rain was coming down in torrents. "Let us wait here," proposed Polychrome, peering out of the hole and then quickly retreating. "The rainbow won't appear until after the storm, and I can make you big again in a jiffy before I join my sisters on our bow." "That's a good plan," said the Scarecrow approvingly. "It will save me from getting soaked and soggy." "It will save me from rusting," said the Tin Soldier. "It will enable me to remain highly polished," said the Tin Woodman. "Oh, as for that, I myself prefer not to get my pretty clothes wet," laughed the Rainbow's daughter. "But while we wait, I will bid you all adieu. I must also thank you for saving me from that dreadful giantess, Mrs. Yoop." You have been good and patient comrades, and I have enjoyed our adventures together, but I am never so happy as when on my dear rainbow." "Will your father scold you for getting left on the earth?" asked Woot. "I suppose so," said Polychrome gaily. "I'm always getting scolded for my mad pranks, as they are called. My sisters are so sweet and lovely and proper that they never dance off our rainbow, and so they never have any adventures. Adventures to me are good fun, only I never like to stay too long on earth because I really don't belong here. I shall tell my father the rainbow that I'll try not to be so careless again, and he will forgive me because in our sky mansions there is always joy and happiness." They were indeed sorry to part with their dainty and beautiful companion, and assured her of their devotion if they ever chanced to meet again. She shook hands with the Scarecrow and the Tin Men, and kissed Woot the Wanderer lightly upon his forehead. And then the rain suddenly ceased, and as the tiny people left the burrow of the Blue Rabbit, a glorious big rainbow appeared in the sky, and the end of the arch slowly descended and touched the ground just where they stood. Woot was so busy watching a score of lovely maidens, sisters of Polychrome, who were leaning over the edge of the bow, and another score who danced gaily amid the radiance of the splendid hues, that he did not notice he was growing big again. But now Polychrome joined her sisters on the rainbow, and the huge arch lifted and slowly melted away as the sun burst from the clouds and sent its own white beams dancing over the meadows. "Why, she's gone!" exclaimed the boy, and turned to see his companions still waving their hands in token of adieu to the vanished Polychrome. The end of chapter 23. The Tin Woodman of Oz by l.frank Baum. Chapter 24. The Curtain Falls. Well, the rest of the story is quickly told, for the return journey of our adventurers was without any important incident. The Scarecrow was so afraid of meeting the hippogiraffe and having his straw eaten again that he urged his comrades to select another route to the Emerald City, and they willingly consented so that the invisible country was wholly avoided. Of course, when they reached the Emerald City, their first duty was to visit Ozma's palace, where they were royally entertained. The Tin Soldier and Woot the Wanderer were welcomed as warmly as any strangers might be who had been the traveling companions of Ozma's dear old friends, the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman. At the banquet table that evening, they related the manner in which they had discovered Nimmy-Ammy, and told how they had found her happily married to Chop-Fight, whose relationship to Nick Chopper and Captain Fighter was so bewildering that they asked Ozma's advice what to do about it. "You need not consider Chop-Fight at all," replied the beautiful girl ruler of Oz. "If Nimmy-Ammy is content with that misfit man for a husband, we have not even just cause to blame Ku-Klip for gluing him together." "I think it was a very good idea," added little Dorothy, "for if Ku-Klip hadn't used up your cast-off parts, they would have been wasted. It's wicked to be wasteful, isn't it?" "Well, anyhow," said Woot the Wanderer, "Chop-Fight being kept a prisoner by his wife is too far away from anyone to bother either of you Tin Men in any way. If you hadn't gone where he is and discovered him, you would never have worried about him. What do you care, anyhow, Betsy Bobbin?" asked the Tin Woodman, "so long as Nimmy-Ammy is satisfied." "And just to think," remarked Tiny Trot, "that any girl would rather live with a mixture like Chop-Fight on faraway Mount Munch than to be the Empress of the Winkies." "It is her own choice," said the Tin Woodman contentedly, "and after all, I'm not sure the Winkies would care to have an Empress." It puzzled Ozma for a time to decide what to do with the Tin Soldier. If he went with the Tin Woodman to the Emperor's castle, she felt that the two Tin Men might not be able to live together in harmony, and moreover, the Emperor would not be so distinguished if he had a double constantly beside him. So she asked Captain Fighter if he was willing to serve her as a soldier, and he promptly declared that nothing would please him more. After he had been in her service for some time, Ozma sent him into the Gillikin country with instructions to keep order among the wild people who inhabit some parts of that unknown country of Oz. As for Woot, being a wanderer by profession, he was allowed to wander wherever he desired, and Ozma promised to keep watch over his future journeys and to protect the boy as well as she was able in case he ever got into more trouble. All this having been happily arranged, the Tin Woodman returned to his tin castle, and his chosen comrade, the Scarecrow, accompanied him on the way. The two friends were sure to pass many pleasant hours together in talking over their recent adventures, for as they neither ate nor slept, they found their greatest amusement in conversation. The end of chapter 23, and the end of the Tin Woodman of Oz.